Hello, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon if you're on the East Coast where I am. And welcome to my little world at Stelar Metals. Stelar Metals is a very new exploration company focused on battery metals. We listed a couple of weeks ago on the ASX. Can we slip past a couple of slides? Disclaimer, of course. So as I say, we are very new and we have a dedicated focus on battery metals. We feel that this is a very important area to be in. From an economic perspective, this is in very high demand and it's required for this clean energy transition that the world is screaming out for and desperately requires. We have a number of projects. They're all focused in South Australia, which is one of the best places to be if you're in the battery metal space, particularly in copper and zinc. Something like 65%, 68% of all copper actually comes from South Australia from the Australian reserves there. Our board and management's got lots of experience, and we'll go through this in a little bit more detail. But maybe let's just jump across the next slide and continue. So, as I say, we're a brand new company. We listed on the 18th, I think, of March, and we put out about 50 million shares at 20 cents. Our share price, I've watched just now, it's around about 30 cents at the moment. And this really is just underpinned by the fact that people recognize that battery metals is a really important place to actually be. We managed to raise our maximum subscription of $7 million, which provides us with plenty of cash to get out there and actually do some work. And we have an enterprise value, which is quite low at only $3.2 million. We've got some interesting spreads of shareholders and some good people behind us that will allow us to continue forwards with this company. Next slide, please. Okay, so the projects. So we tried to pull together a balanced portfolio of projects. These have mostly been acquired over the last 5 years or so by Stephen Biggins, who's our chairman. Stephen and I used to work together at Core Exploration, Core Lithium, where he's still the CEO. I left a number of years ago just so we're getting into lithium. But we've always been picking up tenements like these when they get dropped. The area within the Gawler Craton and the Adelaide Fold Belt in South Australia, as I said earlier, was where most of the copper actually comes from. It's the place of the big boys. So BHP, Oz Minerals, FMG, bigger explorers like Coda, DGO, they're all out there. Brilliant on the zinc side of things. So we have some projects which are iron oxide copper gold, like Evelyn Dam and Torrens and Gunson. Sedimentary copper, and in South Australia, there is a big push for sedimentary copper because the geological situation and environment is very similar to Central Africa, where you have these large sedimentary copper deposits in the DRC and places like that. And then on the zinc front, we're looking at the Adelaide Fold Belt. We're close to Beltana, which is one of Parilia's projects, and we have some carbonate-hosted projects that are over there. For the exploration budget, there's about $5.7 million, which is allocated for the next couple of years. And of course, we need some money to keep running the company. Next slide, please. So why battery metals? Well, each one of those little electric cars that we drive around has got about 94 kilos of copper. All the windmills that we need to run things, to join things together, requires those transmission lines. That's a large amount of copper that is required. And there are some big mines in Chile. There's some big mines here in South Australia. But in general, there is a big shortage. And because of that, the copper price has been going up. Combine this with the fact of other global current events. We pick up the news every day. And there is a big requirement to source this materials which are quite strategic locally and make sure that there is that strategic supply. Now, zinc we've also included here. Zinc is an interesting one. I used to work for Pasminco. We used to be the largest zinc producer back in the 1990s. And, it's used for galvanizing and it really had sort of a bit of a checkered past. But these days, zinc has potential as a new battery metal. There's a number of companies, if you do some Google search around, countries like Zinc Air, are producing or trying to produce new forms of batteries which don't use lithium, and it'll hold a charge longer, it'll hold a bigger charge, and more importantly, once it gets punctured, it's nowhere near as volatile as what lithium is. So, it could make a much safer car and way to go forwards. This is new technology, it's still emerging, it's not quite there yet, but we believe that it could be an important part of the future. we're not necessarily constraining ourselves to copper and zinc, and very keen to look at all sorts of other projects along the way. But for initially, these are the ones that we're going to be looking at. Next slide, please. So this is who we are. So Stephen Biggins, who's the chair of this company and the CEO of Core Lithium. Core Lithium's done rather well in the last year or so, and they're about to go into production producing lithium with some takeoffs with Tesla. I'm the Chief Executive Officer, very much an exploration geologist, and have been around in South Australia for the last 30 odd years. I've been the Vice President of Uranium One, a big global uranium company, and had projects all over the world, but home has always actually been South Australia. We have Jeffrey Webster, who's an engineer, South Australian, and it's good to have someone who's an engineer because they do put a bit of guidance and rigor to us more airy-fairy exploration geologists. Will, though, is an exploration geologist, and he's on the board and is the CEO of Todd River. And then we have Jack, who's our company secretary and CFO. Over the page, please. Okay, so we've got a fully funded exploration program which we've set up for the next couple of years. Over the first quarter, I've been working hard on the land access, regulatory approvals, and we hope in Q2 to start drilling at some of our projects, to start building up some of the other projects by collecting geophysics, soil surveys, mapping, as appropriate to generate up those targets. And by the time we get to the end of this year, it's really going to have to be take stock. What were the results of that drilling programs that we've had in the first part and even in the latter part of this year? And we also will be looking at other projects as they come to mind. And I've already had a couple I've got to look at the moment. So it's exciting times, and especially for a new company. Next slide, please. Okay, we can skip this one. Let's go straight into it. Now, so we have 5 projects. Really, I'm just going to focus on 2 today. Let's start off with Evelyn Dam. This is probably the largest untested gravity anomaly in the Gawler Craton. It was previously a BHP project. They picked up the project. They spent a rather large amount of money buying it off Archer. They collected some more geophysics. They refined up the target. And as big companies do, they change tactics. Boardroom decisions are made in London and long places away without really reflecting on an individual project. So this one got dropped. At this point, Mr. Biggins, our CEO, picked it up, chairman, rather picked it up, and he went into a joint venture with Rio Tinto, who were also interested. So it's a large gravity anomaly. It's big. It's about 5 kilometers in diameter. And we've been doing some modeling with it. And there is some high level protuberances which come up in the top surface of this anomaly, which has not been tested. Rio Tinto, when they did a joint venture with Stephen, did manage to drill 1 hole, but they drilled it vertically and they didn't really pay a great deal of attention, particularly with the refined model. The modeling they used was just on filtered data and using relatively low power computing, whereas nowadays, just a couple of years later, some high-tech stuff is around, so 300 CPU computers are quite standard things to process this data. So we have a new hole that's been planned, but let's have a think about the actual hole that was drilled. So this was drilled about 2 kilometers from where the gravity anomaly is, but it still managed to get in the upper sequences. There was visible native copper. There was reduced zones in a hematized Pandura sandstone cover. But when you come down into the basement, we start to see zones of sericite, chlorite, hematite alteration, and then large veins of fluorite and pink carbonate, all very indicative of being in a distal position from an iron oxide copper gold mineralizing system. Now, Olympic Dam and Carrapateena, they're 50, 100 kilometers more away from where this is. So this is not just something that's reflected from that. This is something which is local there. The magnetic data set, we have some cross-cutting later dikes. They're known as the Gardner Dyke Swarm in South Australia. These have all been disturbed as they were later intruded into this area, and they wrap around and are completely disassociated with the gravity feature. Again, just for emphasizing that there is something which is there unanswered that has never been tested. So it's a bit brave on a brand new exploration company to not go and just drill a couple of meters from the pit walls and with some shallow cheap drilling. We're going to put in a deep diamond hole into this to test it once and for all. And it's high risk, but the returns are potentially very, very high. It's a 100% owned project. All of our projects are. And this one has got all the heritage clearances and agreements in place already for multiple drill holes. So exciting times. And we do hope to be starting this one very, very shortly. Next one, please. Okay, so balances out, slightly lower risk. Linda Zinc prospect. So we're now up in the Adelaide Hills. This was another ex-BHP project. They were doing some soil sediment sample streams in the 1980s and discovered some pretty high zinc numbers. It's located about 80 kilometres away from Beltana in the Adelaide Hills, and it's in the same geological setting. So we're in these carbonate rocks within the Adelaide Fold Belt, and it provides a very unique geological situation. As I say, it's quite similar to what you might see in Central Africa. So there are some copper bits about. There are large diapirs which have come up through, which again just add to the focus of mineralisation. But when you come over to Linda itself, the BHPs, they went out there and they did some mapping. They recognised at surface some large pods of zinc mineralisation, gossans that sticked out at surface. And they did in 1983 come in and do some drilling. Unfortunately, they couldn't get up the hill with a little two-wheel drive drill rig, and they put in 20 shallow 25-metre holes, which came back with some quite interesting results. They then put in 2 diamond holes, a bit deeper, but again, they were nowhere near where these actual pods of mineralisation were. So I can't release those results yet because they need to be converted to JORC, but we will be endeavouring to do that in the near future. Perilia then came in and did some soils back in about 2010, something like that, and have expanded the footprint of anomalism to quite a large area. So it's now over several kilometres. The plan here is to head out relatively soon after Easter, start to map this, start to try and prove up these original BHP results, make sure we have enough confidence and we can release those to the market. Expand out on these soils, and we hope to start drilling later in the year. Next slide. Last slide, lucky last. So we've got an extensive and fully funded exploration program ahead of us. There's a lot of exploration potential that's there. Some of these are high risk, some of these are not. Some of the other projects, which I haven't discussed yet, are still in application. And we have some very large projects where we'll just be collecting geophysics one day, hopefully, to attract a partner who'll be much bigger to come and have a look at it. And we believe this is really the right place to be. South Australia is a great place to actually be working and to start off with. And the battery metals is really a good space to be. It's in high demand. That is not going to change into the near to intermediate future. And we have the right people to be behind this, managing this, and setting up the projects. So I'll leave it there. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Colin. A great presentation. We always love it when majors make decisions in boardrooms a long way away, and it presents a unique opportunity for a junior explorer to grow its portfolio and its value. You guys have been in the industry a long time. It's a pretty common story, isn't it, where you see a major lose interest because of a boardroom decision or a commodity decision or some other decision in a boardroom a long way away, but it always throws up a gem for a junior to grab.
Look, it certainly does. And exploration is very different from mining. And to be honest, exploration people do not make good miners. We should sell the project. We should get out before it ever goes there. And likewise, for those big mining companies, they're not particularly good at exploration. Think back to CRA back in the 1990s. The hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that was spent on exploration, never to find anything. Whereas the lean, mean explorer has a lot more chance of doing things. So it does provide great opportunities when the majors pick up things, spend a large amount of money collecting things, and then just give it to us for nothing. It's great.
Now, I've got a question from an analyst, so bear with me because I need to make sure that I get it right or I will get a nasty email. Do you have a new perspective, or we use other tools to find sedimentary copper and carbonate hosted zinc that perhaps others have missed in South Australia? And what is the highest priority?
Okay, the highest priority, because it's the first one that's on the board, is to go out and try and have a look for the zinc at Linda. we have access, have a plan to go out there and do it. So I'm bringing in a chap called Mark Allen. He was the person who was behind the independent report that was part of our prospectus, and I used to work with him at Pasminco. He's a world expert on carbonate-hosted zinc. So we're going out together to start mapping out this area. It's subcropping, so we know it's there. We are flying some high-resolution orthoimagery to assist in that mapping, and we're also processing and using cluster analysis on various satellite data, much of which is just free to actually obtain, like Sentinel. Then zinc is a tricky one to ever find. It has no petrophysical properties that really make it shine out when it comes to geophysics. And really, it's a case of good mapping, and like RC drilling doesn't really work that well, so diamond drilling, because of voids and whatever else, is a much better technique to actually be using. That said, some gradient IP could have some potential, and we're working with a chap called Dave McGuinness, who's assisting with all the geophysics as to if there's any good techniques there. On the sedimentary copper, it's early days for us. Unfortunately, most of the ground in South Australia has kind of been blocked off by the South Australian government, who are running a whole number of studies themselves, including drill programs, to build up the whole South Australian story when it comes to sedimentary copper. So yeah, it's a case of watch this space. Focus at the moment is on the iron oxide copper gold and the carbonate zinc.
Now, it was a project picked up by a major, and as you say, majors don't necessarily always make good explorers. Do you think the majors, given the nature of the project, keep an eye on what you and others in the area are doing, particularly what's occurring in South Australia through sedimentary work and other mineral expansion?
I would like to think they did, and it's somewhat remiss if they don't. Surely any business will be looking at, what's going on in your space, and contemplating what is the time that you actually approach someone to buy in. If you're dealing with landholders, maybe you have to buy a pastoral station. You do that early in the piece, but what is that perfectly right time to actually do it? At some point, if you're going to a mine, you're probably going to need that property. If you're looking at the explorers, at some point you need to think about when it is you want to come in, and hopefully that answers it.
Thanks, Colin. A great presentation. Stelar Metals, the one to watch, stock code SLB. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.